Greetings, fellow entertainment viewers. I am going to bring you into a dimension of entertainment where we're late, but perhaps fashionably so. I mean, I've got my blockbuster attire on.
Yes.
In a land of movies and mayhem, here is the Vlogcast. And of course, with us, as we have had in the past, we've got, of course, my co-host Jake and two other individuals who've kind of been along with us since we've really started doing this, such as David Strege and, of course, Dane Kyle, or I can, as you've got it there, and, of course, known differently online as Dane, let's see, Damarong, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. And there's a cat.
Yes. There are multiple cats.
Yes, there was one that was hanging around here with his tail across while I was doing the pickups. But I decided he thought he was put in front of the camera. He was wrong. So I thought I would start us off this time around because I completed a pretty lengthy viewing because I had started working my way back into this series for a while. And I finally said, you know what, I'm going to start just completing some of these series that I've only half finished. I mean, like right now I'm working on The Flash because I watched the first 2 seasons and then stopped. And I've got 2 other seasons on DVD that I need to go through. So I went ahead and I had only rewatched the first 4 seasons of Ranma 1/2. And this is a series that I've had in completion for a long time. But they did these beautiful limited Blu-ray sets that they came out with that apparently Volume 4 is extremely hard to get nowadays. So it's kind of sad because they're beautiful sets that were released. It's a 7-season anime with an OVA and 3 movies, if you count the third one as a movie. I look at it more of as just an additional OVA episode.
Oh, the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Yeah. And they released it. They released the movies and the OVA all in one set. And I really liked that, unlike all previous American releases where they chose the original opener for the first half as was original. But then the second half of the series had a different opener and ender for each episode. But instead of that, they just chose one of those openers and enders and ran it for the second half. So I love that they reincorporated that properly. So I get to watch that series as it was properly meant to be seen.
I need to do that.
It was the first anime series that I had really gotten me into anime in the first place. And I remember that from the beginning when I was sent to pick up some of these comics from when I was doing my comic book collecting back in the day. And I picked up those issues for them. And then I realized, you know what? I really like this. I'm keeping it. So I just thought I would start that because it did mean a lot to me to go through it again and revisit it. And I feel like it's held up very well since my teenage years when I originally got into the series. And it's rare to see. Sometimes it is rare that things like that will hold up over time. I don't know if any of the other. I know that Jake's familiar with Ranma, and probably you have the whole series in some format, if I recall correctly.
I do. I have the Slim Pack DVD release. I've been wanting to upgrade to the
also
Blu-ray.
out of print.
Yes.
There it is.
Actually, and I do have the really old out of print. You're talking about the original OVA releases. There were, I think, 2 old releases where the first one, I think they didn't even bother with the alternate openers and enders. The one I have, they have them as a bonus feature at least.
Yeah, that's the yellow cover one, if I recall correctly.
Yes. Right.
I might even have my old copy because I remember you used to own the old one at one time.
I don't think I've changed copies on that. I don't know. But I do know, even though Bokutachi wa Korekara is one of my absolute favorite end openers ever, and Red Shoe Sunday is also a nice ender. Mm-hmm. It is nice to see them the others reinstituted. Yes.
So I'm sure that I don't know if either of you are familiar with the series, but Rumiko Takahashi.
I played a lot of the fighting.
I don't remember if I got to play that game. Did I?
That was my first introduction. Was the Super Nintendo game?
Yeah, actually, that's what I was gonna say. Was I played not only the one that came out in America, but some of the Super Famicom ones that were Japan only. Because we had a third party. We had an SNES, and then we had a third party converter. Which really all it is if you if you wanted to like tear your SNES apart, you could just take out the little pins that are preventing you from playing Super Famicom games, but we got like a third-party little converter there that you put it in the SNES, and then you pop in a Super Famicom cartridge, and there you go. Yeah, but yeah, that was my extent of my exposure. I mean, I know about it. I just never really watched it. It was, I think it was one of those shows that had it not dealt with like, gender bending and stuff, and had it not come out when it did, that it probably would have been on Toonami, but given when Toonami was a thing, and well, and in daytime television and stuff, like if it had been on Adult Swim, maybe, but it
would have been very, very hard to edit that show properly.
It would a lot of topless nudity as well.
Heck, your favorite theme, Little Date, the season 2 opener, has a still of Ronco nude in the bath is part of the opening sequence.
Well, it's a weird thing. It's a weird thing when you think about nudity in Japan, because it's a weird thing because they have odd things that they allow and then odd things that they don't allow, because they will censor the genitals of porn stars, and yet like in the mangas and stuff for like say Dragon Ball, you'll see little underage Goku's penis, and you'll see all this stuff that you would never see in live action, and certainly you'd never see in just about any context here, except for the Simpsons movie, which showed Bart's penis for some reason, because we just wanted to we just wanted to delight all the pedophiles out there.
I think we mentioned either last week or the week before or something along those lines of like what was it? The Dragon Ball. Talking about how I know recently, I think this was one of the videos I recently rewatched, where we talked about how in my library, Dragon Ball is considered an adult series, and Dragon Ball Super is considered a kid series. And the main reason why it probably is certain things like Goku running around not fully dressed, and also his grabbing to check why is there nothing there?
He
doesn't mean anything by it. It's a running joke about what a simpleton he is in terms of society and other things like that, but it is kind of amusing. But in an American audience, that's scandalous, and it's like, geez. But I get a big thing of like, it's weird how so many cultures, but definitely the American culture, so freaking prudish when it comes to nudity and sex and all that stuff. But then you look at you can be as violent as you want, whatever.
Which is the opposite in Japan.
Well, and it's the opposite in a lot of. It's the opposite in a lot of European countries. They're much more okay with not only nudity, but like Alan Moore ran into this problem when he did Lost Girls, because that is explicitly a work of pornography, and they never shied away from the fact that it was pornography, but it was like more artistic and more, trying to stimulate the mind as well as the genitals. But what he specifically talked about was how in the United States and in the UK, where he is, they still have such a bugaboo about sex. But then in countries like Denmark and Spain and the Netherlands, that pornography is accepted as just another genre. And, and then here's the other thing that, like, in Japan, in 1976, it was a great film that came out, In the Realm of the Senses, about the what was it, Shinzo Abe, or am I remembering that case? That I might be getting the name wrong, but that was the very famous Sada Abe, excuse me, Sada Abe, that famous case. And well, with that film, there was a lot of unsimulated sex, so like it's, the actors were really having sex with each other, and it's readily obvious, which I believe it caused quite a lot of scandal in Japan. It was kind of the their version of like Last Tango in Paris, but even then, that was mostly simulated. It wasn't, like with In the Realm of the Senses, like it's you see it all the juicy bits you'd want to see. But it's like literally. But I assume that was probably part of what made them, censor like their porn and stuff, which again, it's just there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because like I never, in my research, I never quite figured out like a definitive answer to this question, because I'd heard that, the age of consent in Japan is like 13, which I think that's technically true, but then there's a lot of other provisos that I guess go into it if the other person is not like within a few years of that number. So like obviously they can't have alcoholic beverages and stuff, but like but like there's a lot of, I think, additional provisos that would prevent it from being like, a pervert's paradise or something. Although I do think that there is that stereotype of Japanese men being very perverted, but that's
the panties and vending machines.
Oh yeah, except which that there's that, but then also if you do your research, like yes, they have that, but it's not just that. They have like pretty much anything you could think of in a vending machine, just because they. I don't know. That's just a thing. It's like milk in bags in Eastern Canada. It's like it's just a thing. But so yes, they do have that, but it's not exactly what people think. But yeah, it's just there's all kinds of cultural differences and legal differences and all these different things that, if you wanted to be a bit of a cultural anthropologist, you could go down a massive rabbit hole of researching all that.
Well, look at our coverage last week of video violence, where the woman walks in and just says, oh, is there any nudity? Okay, good. I can show this to the kids. I mean, just like this is a good example of a series, Gantz.
Yes.
This was not allowed to be on public TV.
Oh, I know that was so funny.
Because it's because of the violence in this. This is this is ultra violence to the extreme.
He showed me an episode and it turned me off so bad I've not revisited it.
There's 2 seasons of this. And again, it wasn't the sex that turned this off. It was the pure violence.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like rape, violence, destruction. Yeah. It's just all over the place. It's that extreme. Even I really have no desire to watch it much in the future. But Dave, for your in case you haven't seen this one before, it's called
which, well, what's funny about that? What's funny about that? So I have actually, I don't have like a whole bunch of anime in my collection, and I feel bad because I really should, and I'll I will, I'll expand. But one thing that I do have is I have the complete series of it was relatively inexpensive, and you'll find those complete series sets for some anime relative, like it's the super amazing value edition. You'll find those, and that's a relatively inexpensive way to get into it. But the one that I have is one called "Wanna Be the Strongest in the World," and that's about.
I do have that one.
You do have that one, okay? Because it's about female pro wrestlers, and it's like gratuitous, like women with giant boobs, and it's like it's shameless, but it's like, oh, I love it because it's just they have no pretensions about anything. It's like they're just like TNA, the show. It's
actually,
like I don't know. That's just.
If you watch our new release schedule for this week, there's a show coming out from Sentai called Domestic Girlfriend that is basically this dude has the hots for his teacher. He gets frustrated at his lack of progress, so he hooks up with a girl he meets at a mixer. Turns out she and the teacher are sisters, and their mother is about to marry his father. And so it's like the show starts with this blatant, trashy, soap opera-esque sort of thing. And from what I understand, it's a show that fully indulges in its trashiness, but does it in a good way. And that kind of, but that kind of show could be quite interesting. It's when a show either there are some though that just suck. There are some that are just like lazy attempts to, that just
Well, you talked about Cartoon Network.
Titillate the audience.
Yes, but sometimes they don't even try hard, and it's like sometimes you can definitely get a little bit of that going on with shows that are genuinely good in other ways. Like, yes, Rama has a lot of nudity, but it really, the main draw, the subtitle is anything goes martial arts. They really are. It's almost like the theme of the show is what new martial art can we come up with?
I love it. See, like I don't know if you would. I hope that this doesn't qualify as like misogyny or anything, but I really don't want it to. But like one of my favorite movies of all time is Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and I think something like that, something like a lot of Russ Myers stuff, and something like Want to Be the Strongest in the World. It's like I think I would kind of put that off in its own category. I wouldn't necessarily call it like traditional misogyny, just because it's got a lot of bosomatic women, but the difference is that like they're generally like they're portrayed as being strong and capable, and the tone is very fun, and it's like it's not taking itself too seriously, and it's like there's not, and this is coming from a sex positive perspective, but it's like there's absolutely nothing wrong with portraying human sexuality or human attractiveness in whatever form. So I mean that's where I'm coming from with it, and it's like I always think it's hilarious and awesome when you have like those kinds of things.
I think that's why people get into a lot of Russ Meyer stuff, because he started out sleazy, but he ultimately did become like a king of his own filmmaking. I mean, the stories got better. Some maybe some of the ladies got a little bit more bodacious, but it's a little bit, like he's playing the flip side of the coin. It's like he's got an idea, a really cool idea behind many of his films. And I think that's what makes it unique for each of his films. It's not always about the sexiness. It's not always about the sex or the people going in and out of each other. It's
Well, it's something that like I think some critics looking back at his his career kind of called him one of the earliest like feminist filmmakers in a weird kind of way. Like I think you could definitely make that point. It would be perhaps not in the conventional sense, but I think there's enough of that to count, especially relative to his time, because his films predominantly they were coming out in the height of the sexual revolution, and he's kind of in a similar category to someone like Hugh Hefner, except I think perhaps a little less. I think you could make the feminist case for someone like Russ Meyer easier than you could Hugh Hefner, even though you could make that case as well. But like I remember when he died, there was no kind of universal post-mortem consensus on him. Like people were still very like conflicted about how to remember him, which honestly, to be honest, I found that rather refreshing, because there's nothing I hate more than when someone dies, everything that they ever did, get everything bad that someone ever did, like it gets completely forgotten about, or with certain people, everything good that they ever did got completely forgotten about, and history just kind of relegates them to heroes and villains. And it's like, well, no, everybody's a mixture of both to some degree or another. And I was like, hey, look at that with Hugh Hefner. It's like good that someone, that someone's reputation is such that, you can take what you want from it, and that you're not like supposed to think of this person as a hero or a villain. You can take what you want from it. And the truth is that every one of us, we have both of them. We have both hero and villain traits inside of us. So, I found that rather refreshing personally.
Well, I think we also have both feminine and masculine affinities of our parents. So to me, it's like,
of course,
it's like depends on what your sexuality is, So.
Well, and I've always been of the opinion that human sexuality of any kind, whether it's masculine, feminine, whatever, that there's nothing wrong with it at all. Like whatever floats your boat. And I mean, straight women tend to like to watch attractive straight women, and men who it depends on like the kind of thing. I mean, there's exceptions to all these things, but like I'm thinking of like the 80s action movies, how the Schwarzeneggers and the Stallones, they were absolutely ripped, and it's like that's kind of an idealized male physiques, and something that the young men watching those films looked up to. So
right.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be sexual in nature, but it's still an appreciation of a human form.
Yeah, but that's a good back to that whole thing about like the nudity versus violence and whatever. Some of the 80s were a time of like ultra violent films.
Oh God, yeah.
Like it was
like 34.
oh,
Like
man.
Oh yeah.
Even the anime, yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of that was played to excess, to the part where it started to be parodying itself. But still, you had
look no further than the original RoboCop, because that was kind of a social satire. But I think you could also make the point that it was kind of satirizing other violent movies, because it was so over the top and deliberately so, and it had like a very satirical tone. So I think you could definitely make that point. And even some people, retrospectively, some people have made that, speaking of Paul Verhoeven, retrospectively, some people have made that point with Showgirls, as far as they've looked at Showgirls through a satirical lens as well, with satirizing. No, but like when it comes to sex and nudity, it's like satirizing like the showbiz rise and fall story, and the like the sexualization is so, it reaches a peak campiness that it's like I can definitely see it through a satirical lens. I don't know if that's necessarily what they had in mind when they made it, but I think you could definitely make that case, and I think that there is an element of satire in there.
Right. I actually think that we have improved as a society a little. I'll give you a good example. Back in the 90s, we were talking about Toonami and some of those. Of course, Rumiko Takahashi's other work, Inuyasha, did get appearance on Toonami. But good example, Sailor Moon. And how we edited. These two in particular. Now, we worked hard to try and get rid of anything that could be LGBTQ, anything that might be overtly sexual. So what did they do with these two characters who are actually lesbian lovers?
Brother and sister or something.
They made them cousins.
Cousins, excuse
me. And then they still kept in scenes where they were kissing. So they call them kissing cousins. Yeah. So that made it much better, of course. Or this one, where this is the first time this has ever been released here in the United States. Sailor Stars, because of the gender bending element.
I saw when I think it was Fathom Events when they had a screening of Sailor Moon R, the movie, and that was like, that was like the brand new English dub that restored the fact that they were LGBTQ lovers and just other things that wouldn't have flown in the old days and things. And it was, and now keep in mind, I knew generally, the story. I wasn't, I hadn't kept up with it as much as I should have, because again, anime is one of those things that I really do want to get into it more than I have. It's just more so that the financial bar to entry can be kind of daunting as far as like how much the box sets cost, especially Sailor Moon box sets are really expensive.
Oh, yeah. But, if you're trying to get in on Viz or Funimation or especially Aniplex, oh my God. But Sentai does some pretty incredible sales, and so does Right Stuff, and you can get some good stuff pretty cheap sometimes.
There's a little bit of anime back here.
Just a bit.
Yeah, I see that.
Another Takahashi series.
Actually,
right
another. When we did our pickups for this week, I presented one that was my only purchase from the last Sentai sale. But this is a series called Bloom Into You that is a series that got a lot of praise from the LGBTQ community because it's a Yuri series. Basically, it's about a romance between two girls. But those series are usually played for laughs or they're played more pruriently. And this one supposedly is just a straightforward high school relationship romance that plays it straight. And so it got a lot of buzz for that, But it's nice to know that you can get different takes on that it doesn't always fit into that one. Because like I said, they sure do play up that kind of thing for laughs. And sometimes they'll play into more pruriency. One of the, there's the guy, Shinichi, I think it is. Ikuhara is his last name. Do you remember, Brandon? Ikehara has played with those themes a lot over the years, and going all the way back to Revolutionary Girl Atena. And actually, he was involved with Sailor Moon, but he did one called Yurikuma Arashi, which literally translates Lily Bear Storm. And it's a gorgeously artistic series, and it's not safe for work.
And the bar is depending. For me, I have such an attachment to this series, especially this season, because this season, the fact that it was kept out just because of prudishness. It had me do it. But there are many ways to get into this without having to break the bank. Not like this, but But Jake can tell, as he said, some of these series are remarkably inexpensive. This is Inuyasha. You can get that relatively cheaply these days. Just so much of it.
I know. Just recently, there was a guy who posted a bunch of stuff in an Animazing group. I ended up getting a small. I guess his prices are relatively decent. What he does is he buys up sets or whatnot, and I don't know if you bought from him before, but he seems to be okay.
He usually has stuff up that I already have, but I see that a lot of the prices But again, even some of the new prices on some of these, like some of the limited sets from Funimation, went on sale for $10 for like 12 episodes. So they're comparable to a lot of US TV seasons nowadays, unless you're going with Aniplex. Then they're like $100 for a season. Not like in the old days of anime collecting where you would pay $30 to get a video cassette with 2 episodes on it.
Remember trying to get into TV shows in the VHS era and how impossible it was, because the most that they could fit on a tape was 2 episodes, and so and they didn't even release TV shows physically all that much back then. So like the few that were, like, let's say the original Star Trek series or X-Files or something, you would have to have like a massive row of just to have like the complete first season on a physical copy. And it's like, okay, that's a clear win for DVDs and Blu-rays, that's for sure. I'm trying to find the name of that one show that there you go. Here's a show that I can only imagine how safe for work this is, but it's called Yamada's First Time.
That's a good one.
it's this very coquettish looking, very obviously newly pubescent girl, and she's surrounded by cherries.
High school.
Well, it's like she's surrounded by cherries, so I can only assume that means it's about a cherry enthusiast. Or someone who grows cherries.
Did you read the description of what her stated goal is?
Well, let's find out, shall we, kids? Okay. So, this is directly from Amazon, boys and girls. This is part of Sex Ed. She can't give it away, from the director who brought you Welcome to the NHK. Did you hear about Yamada? I heard that Little Miss Virgin wants to have sex with 100 different dudes before she graduates. I'd probably hook up with her, but she'd have to practice first. I like my ladies experienced.
But the basic idea is she is a virgin. She is naive. She tries to practice with this guy who I think she calls him Cherry Coon. Because basically he is a virgin too. And basically she can't get him into, so it's like, it has that really raunchy premise, but it's actually a pretty decent show.
I was gonna say it's probably one of the least raunchy I've seen in a while, which is it's just a weird premise, because she's kind of prudish herself despite what she claims. Because she also ends up blocking herself a lot of the time. Because
I love her pose on the cover there. It's like, oh wow,
eventually Sentai will break the boundaries of hentai and then immediately explode into more sexier shit. So,
Sentai has been trying. Some of their cover art's a little more than it should be. But
I remembered just seeing that cover, and I was like, okay, I gotta do that. As far as like my forays into anime, I was like, I'm on board. This is too good, I mean, and it's I have to say it already, just based on the cover and the description, it's got a whole lot more charm and spunk and personality than any other like American high school like lose my virginity kind of movie I can think of. Those tend to be a bit more on the I guess you could say cynical side, or more on the like somewhat of like what would have been called maybe like teen exploitation, but like this, just from based on that description, I was like, okay, I'm there,
Well, I mean, we covered this one on our anime month, which sadly you weren't with us, were you, for that one? I think you had left us at that point.
Yeah.
But Your Name, which is probably it's probably one of the best movies, and it can show that the anime itself can, in my opinion, compete with live action when it comes to artistic viability and as far as respect amongst films. I mean, this one to me holds up to even some of the greats when it comes to artistic nature in film. And there are some others that are like that too.
You guys should check out, if you haven't already, but a very big YouTube movie reviewer, Chris Stuckman. He talks about anime all the time, and often he'll put anime films on his like best of whatever year list. Like he makes a point of doing that, and he's done a lot of like why anime is important, and like I think he actually wrote a book about that, as well as like did a whole big like Toonami retrospective. It's like I could send you some links on that because I have a feeling you'd probably relate to it. And you know, but yeah, I just as far as anime goes, like it's when I saw that I was like, okay, that's got to happen. And I also pre-ordered the. I also say it again.
I said, didn't that one just get an Essentials release, the Yamada's first time?
Yeah, there was the super amazing value edition that I saw. I also I pre-ordered the steelbook of Kiki's Delivery Service.
Awesome movie.
Yeah, which I have seen that one. I am sorry to say I've not seen all of Hayao Miyazaki's work, but I will remedy that. I have seen Kiki's Delivery Service, and I remembered when I watched it, I would have to watch it again to point out exactly like bit for bit what I was observing. But when I watched it, I had recently watched Spider-Man 2 again. And then I noticed like there were a lot of similar plot points that matched up with it, as far as like someone trying to balance a normal life and have a dating life and have her responsibilities, and they have powers, and they, you know, all these kinds of things. They both have, you know, love interests that they have to save, and you know, I'd have to watch it again just to match it up beat for beat. But there was an abnormal amount of story points that matched up.
It's just too bad Spider-Man didn't have a smart-ass talking cat.
I mean, classic Spider-Man is enough of a smart-ass on his own, but
that's true.
But yeah, that was a weird observation, but I remembered when I watched it, I was like, this is like Spider-Man 2, even though Spider-Man 2 came out long after Kiki's Delivery Service came out. Well, in Japan, let alone the American dub. You know,
that's a good tie-in too, actually, because you'll often hear people complain about the over-sexualization of comics, but you almost never hear complaints about their violence level. You know, it's really weird. It's like sometimes with the more off-brand comics, like. And actually, I think that was one of the points behind. I read a really incredible series from Image Comics called Invincible, and Invincible that went way over the top with the violence. But I think they did that very much to satirize how violent comics really could be, and I guess kind of to prove that they could get away with it.
Well, from what I understand, it was the same creator as The Walking Dead, if I recall, his whole concept behind Invincible was to do kind of, as he put it, to zig where other superhero comics zagged. You know, so like go the complete opposite route of where most superhero comics would go. And I mean, you know, Invincible, from what I understand, it's sort of like, you know, the Superman type character as far as like someone really, really powerful. But, you know, again, they go in a complete different direction.
Well, they also melded it together what was obviously the Cyclops Jean Grey dynamic with the two main characters. Eve is obviously Phoenix. She cannot die. And Mark is obviously as big of a dick as Cyclops. So,
I always liked Cyclops. Everybody pissed on him, especially in the era of Wolverine. Everybody was like, you know.
I always thought he was just a dick.
I mean, I could see it, but I mean, he's the leader, and he's got to keep everybody in line, especially someone like Wolverine who wants to go off and be Mr. I'm tortured, I'm a loner kind of thing. Which as far as comic books and violence, I think, well, obviously in the 50s, you had Frederick Wertham and his Seduction of the Innocent book that caused a big stir. And then, like in the 70s, the Comics Code Authority, the rules got lessened and lessened. And then you had like the indie comic scene arise. And then, of course, the 90s with Image, then boom, the floodgates opened for things that didn't have to adhere to Comics Code Authority rules because they were doing the direct sales market back when there were a lot of comic stores, like physical brick and mortar stores before the big crash. And in that respect, then they could afford to get away with a lot more explicitness in their content. Now, I think part of why there's not as much of a complaint in terms of comic book violence is partially because, well, the comic book medium tragically has become far more niche than it ever was. Like it used to be a massive, mainstream thing. And not to say that there's not a mainstream element to it, like the Marvels and DCs of the world, they still command the big market share there. But I think it's more so because they tend to not they want to be mainstream enough to where they can capture as much of the audience that is there, which again is not as much as it once was, but they want to do what they can to attract the audience that is there, that they don't necessarily need to alienate everybody. But what you get is something that perhaps isn't as explicitly violent as something else might be, with some exceptions, like the Punisher, is going to be violent, but but you also, by that same token, you'll see a lot more either sexualization or accusations of sexualization with the women, because part of it is, well, costume design, but also part of it is that you're drawing these very anatomically perfect human bodies, male and female. And so you combine the two. You combine the fact that the primary audience for comics is still men, even though we've seen.
I would actually very much beg to differ on your demographic information there, because I work in a library. There are a lot of people who check out graphic novels, comics, manga, whatever. There are a lot of people, and they do come in all different shapes, sizes, and ages. So I would actually think it's less niche than ever.
Well, I think let me clarify. I'm talking about like the classical issues of comic books that you buy, single issues. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about. I'm thinking about like physical single issues, then what goes on the comic sales charts. Not talking about the trade paperbacks, not talking about digital comics, because yes, when you factor those in, then yes, it opens up the floodgates to anybody and everyone. And if anything, the trade paperbacks, they've actually leveled the playing field demographic wise. Like you said,
I used to collect the single issue ones because of their collectability. But now I prefer the trade paperbacks because they're more durable and they fit better on the shelf, and all kind of stuff.
Yeah, I always, that's how I got into comics, through the collections, and especially like Marvel put out, which I don't even know if they do anymore, but they put out their Essential series of collections of, they were in black and white and they were kind of thin paper, so they weren't glossy or anything, but it was like I would get like Essential Spider-Man, Essential Avengers. They would just start from the beginning and just take you on through. And this is before like Marvel.com having like the giant digital archive, but I would get those when I was a kid, and they were a relatively inexpensive way to get a lot of issues all in one place, and they started from the beginning, and it was just a great way to get introduced to the really good stuff, the 60s, 70s, the really foundational comics that helped pave the way for everything else. And then of course as I got older, then I discovered who Alan Moore was and who Neil Gaiman was, and the next level up in terms of sophistication. So with the trade paperbacks and stuff, and especially like with some newer stuff like Saga and The Walking Dead and everything, it's definitely I've heard nothing but great things, but but you're right, like that has totally leveled the playing field because it's made it far more accessible in the long term to people, because they can go back to the beginnings of things. Because if you're dealing with just single issue comics, then that tends to cater to a very niche market, and I can understand why, because it's kind of impractical these days, and plus even if you do collect them, it's like, well, you'd have to do what they do in comic shelves, lay them in the boxes to face front and shuffle through them. It's like you can't display them on the shelf. You can't easily look at the spine to tell what issue it is or anything like that. And it made perfect sense back in the days when comics were considered, disposable entertainment, like, because there were just a lot more in the way of magazines and in the way of,
the Harley graphic novels here. They look much nicer on the shelf than if they were individual,
Exactly. And, but yeah, that was a carryover from when they were considered more disposable entertainment and not collector's items like the older, rarer ones, why they are considered collector's items. But the, nowadays, obviously, and plus, like, there was much more being printed on paper in general, let alone the cheaper paper that comics tended to be printed on. I mean, they were kind of like the visual equivalent of like classical pulp fiction, and they were called that because of the rough quality of the paper that they were printed on. And then, of course, nowadays, I think the quality of the paper has improved a bit, but the audience for single issue comics is definitely the lowest it's ever been.
Well, I think that a lot of it, when you look into this, and I really do think that there has been a resurgence of people looking into comics. Back in what was a niche market for many reasons, but one of the things I feel that has brought people out of that and has introduced it, for better or for worse, would be really the MCU in general. It wasn't Disney to start it, but Disney acquired it as it went on. But that itself brought comics into the mainstream. It was only niche people who were collecting comics, who really liked comic book movies. There were exceptions, like the original Superman movie, the Tim Burton Batman movies, but for the most part, they were niche things. Now you've got the current movies. Of course, the movies also have driven home a whole new era of, you're talking about the 80s, like perfect male bond. They actually put that to the extreme, to where not only are they unrealistic, they're unattainable.
And sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's part of the character. I mean, nobody is going to be the Hulk, and no one's going to be, Drax the Destroyer. Even though that they didn't have to do a whole lot with Dave Bautista other than paint him, but
no one can be Rocket.
Exactly. I mean, well, your point is well taken, though. I mean, I would go back to like, X-Men and Spider-Man, like the first.
It was
of those.
kind of a slow build because you did have the X-Men, you did have Spider-Man, you did have Blade, and then of course Iron Man came out in the wake of The Dark Knight. So definitely that trilogy also helped kickstart it. And then your independent stuff. Kick-Ass came a couple years later, things like that. I think Scott Pilgrim was the next year. So it
was 2010 also.
It was 2010, yeah. So you had kind of almost a perfect storm, but it kind of was building for a while. I think between The Dark Knight, Iron Man, and then The Incredible Hulk, I think was a few months later, it was like that year was just like, holy crap, there's comic book movies and people are going to see them. And that was
the 2000s up to that point, the 2000s were very much like that was like the first wave of comic book movies, but they were very much in that we think we can mindset. And to a certain degree that was good because like the original 3 Spider-Man films, they were all written to like, in other words, like if there was only the one movie or the only the 2 or only the 3 or whatever, then they were all self-contained and they didn't fall into the trap of like Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 where they were they kept trying to like build up to something but to a degree to where they didn't feel like complete movies in and of themselves. So there was an advantage to that, but then the disadvantage, of course, was you couldn't have the crossovers and the, that stuff because the different studios had the rights and all that. But it was definitely
the first 2 Spider-Mans because the second one they were forced to cram 2 movies into one. But
I don't know where to start to cover some of that, some of the MC universe. I mean, I want to go back to the very beginning, but
the very beginning of the MCU is Iron Man. That's the very beginning of that universe.
Yeah, but, I mean, you would have to figure out like what continuity are you talking about? Because, like you said, the MCU, that's when it starts. If you're talking about comic book movies in general, then you got to go all the way back to like the Captain America and Batman serials in the 40s.
I don't really want to cover those more or less. I just want to cover the main movies, So.
I would say if you want to say like you don't think the MCU is a good starting point, but you want to start with Marvel's earlier ones, maybe those early Captain America ones. Maybe if you're feeling froggy, Howard the Duck and the Richard Corman FF, but probably the Blade movies and the X-Men movies would be the place to start.
The Blade movies, the X-Men movies, the Spider-Man movies, the Tobey Maguire ones. Those are really where comic book movies stop being niche and Marvel. I mean,
Blade was still more of a niche, but it was more like action horror. But it wasn't.
They were getting there. Yeah, they were getting there. It's really same with X-Men. Like they were, it was like, it was kind of like, Blade was like, runner at first base. X-Men was like runner at second base. Spider-Man was like a home run that made the other ones all.
X-Men 3 was like a foul ball, and then Wolverine almost killed it all.
Oh yeah, well, X-Men Origins Wolverine was like a foul ball that hit the umpire in the head and gave him brain damage. But
they got the stadium sued for damages.
Exactly. Well, and I bring up the baseball metaphor because Todd McFarlane is a huge baseball nut, and he likes that. Well, he used the baseball metaphor like for the Spawn movie. He called that a solid double, and then the Spawn, the animated series, he called that a home run. And that seems fair, because like the Spawn movie, it helps to kind of get the brand more into the mainstream, and then the animated series let them do the serialized narrative, and it let them, keep truer to the look of the comics and, all that stuff. And they didn't, they could keep it really dark and violent and everything. So I think that's a solid metaphor there. But it's interesting as far, if you look back at the history of comic book movies, the ones that tended to get adapted, not always, but generally speaking, the ones that tended to get adapted for obvious reasons, limitations on special effects, the ones that tended to get adopted were the lower tech ones like Batman or The Shadow, Dick Tracy, even like even like the 1990 Captain America, like, Captain America as a character is pretty low tech, so
stuff you would not at all think of as comic book, which Dick Tracy is a good example, but even more so stuff like A History of Violence, Road to Perdition, Ghost World. These are they're not, and
Now, I will say that to give them both, and I also want to give the CW a boost in this as well. The CW and the MCU were probably the first to truly pull off something amazing. The CW, I feel like, was also an amazing feat so far, and I haven't seen a feat like that on TV before, where it actually felt like you were reading the comics. Never before had you gotten to the point where you had that interactive universe for either. The MCU did it for the movies. That scale has, not to my knowledge, been attempted. Well, sorry, successfully.
Been attempted many times.
Been attempted many times, but has not been successful. And the CW did that also with the Arrowverse. When I watch something or look at a crossover from the Arrowverse, it feels like I'm actually going and reading the comics. So they both have their drawbacks, especially the MCU in a way, because there is a part of me that's like, I kind of feel leery about supporting the conglomerate known as Disney, because I feel like they keep swallowing the world whole, and that bothers me when any one force tries to gobble up everything. But at the same time, it is an amazing feat, nevertheless. I mean,
I was gonna say I'd be a lot more angry at that if the end product wasn't good, like if they weren't doing a good job with it and they were swallowing everything up. But with them doing it, they've been really fortunate that they've had it under really good management, with the top tiers, like as far as management, top tiers, the MCU, the output of like Disney and Pixar, that has been fairly solid. And like, I think that they could have had a lot more top down management with Star Wars, like from the beginning, like plotted out a lot more thoroughly. But I mean, I liked what I got. And especially like with something like The Mandalorian, like I want them to go more in that direction as far as like, keep the universe alive, but keep it on Disney Plus, just let the side stories take over for a while. Because Mandalorian's great. And so, I mean, if the only IP that I can, the only acquired IP that I can think of that Disney mostly fumbled the ball on was the Muppets, unfortunately. Like there were some great things like the 2011 Muppets. But like when they first acquired them, like I think the very first thing they did was the Muppet Wizard of Oz, which was that direct to TV special, which I really didn't like when I saw it. That was like when I was a kid, but like I saw that, and then Muppets Most Wanted was a disappointment. The Muppets TV show, like that felt to like there were things about it I liked, but I think on the whole, like it felt like it was 10 years too late. Like if that had come out, if that had come out while The Office was in its prime, then it would have been the satire would have been palpable. It felt 10 years too late. And
actually, I wanted to, before we move too far away from the point of the cinematic universe, I did think of one other example where it has been done before. Universal's Monsters, not the dark thing that they're. The original Universal's Monsters was the first time that has been successfully done. I feel like the MCU topped it, but I do feel like it was successful. I mean, all those monster movies
they topped it because
the current attempts.
they topped it because the Universal sense of continuity was shaky at best. But again, it was a different world back then because there was no home video. So they could get away with retconning stuff a whole lot easier than you could in the era of home video. Or even something like Rise of Skywalker, which like had all it took was the perception of retconning, if not outright retconning, depending on your point of view, but even just the the mere perception of it in the not just the home video world, but in the internet age. Like, oh boy, people will jump on that faster than you can say Bob's your uncle.
Actually, Dave, what are your thoughts on that whole deal of having an interactive universe?
As far as what?
Oh, well, movies, TV. I mean, can you think of any successful examples from the past that have done it as well?
Well, you mentioned one of them, which was the Monumental Universe of Monsters. I mean, for a time back in the 30s and 40s, those were pretty much like the superheroes of the day. I mean, and now you can easily just have a marathon of them and still enjoy them to this day. But as far as intercontinental universal connectivity, as far as mainstream goes, even though they sync some films while they're at it, I mean, you either have a high point and a low point, but there's still a lot of cool interconnections that Disney is doing at this point in age. Like I would like the films that I would say that are on the plate in the MCU universe that I'd love for them to bring to the plate now are the new Black Panther, I'd like to see where they're going with the Aquaman universe.
That's DC.
I'd like them to bring the Submariner to the table.
That's
a
tricky one because his rights are all over the map.
Though I think that they are doing a Fantastic Four movie.
I love them to.
Yeah, they got the rights to the Submariner back because they got the rights to the Fantastic Four back because he's considered a derivative character, even though he technically came out before they did, but he also came out at the same time as he also came out. He came out at the same time as the original Human Torch in the late 30s.
That's the thing. He came out way back then, and I believe, if I remember correctly, I think Universal owns part of the rights, which they also do with Hulk, but they were willing to play ball with Hulk.
Well, shoot, Marvel owns the rights to Dracula, so
you mean Tomb of Dracula? I mean, yeah, they own that, but I mean, Dracula is public domain, so I mean, anybody can make a Dracula film. I mean, Universal, they protect their version of Dracula, that likeness. They protect it very strongly, of course. But I would love to see a Tomb of Dracula.
And the Marvel Dracula is a different likeness.
That's a different likeness.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be cool? Actually, they would probably, if they were to do that, they'd probably throw in with Blade, because that is where Blade came from. Comic series.
I did recently read a can't remember if it was Avengers. It was one of those Avengers series that did involve both Blade and Dracula. They were both actively involved in the story. So I did see that recently. And that could make for an interesting way to bring Blade into the MCU or something like that.
Well, there is a precedent for it, so that works.
I would like to see what they're bringing to the table with the Deadpool Suicide Squad thing that they're bringing out, because we've seen Suicide Squad, and there are people on either side of the table, whether they love it or hate it. I would like to see what they can do with a sequel to Suicide Squad, just to see where they're going with that. I'd like to see what they're going to.
Well, they got James Gunn this time. It's going to be better.
I'd like to see.
And we're jumping to the DC extended universe with that, but now that you're on that subject, it will be a sequel slash I think they said like a standalone sequel, but from what I understand, I mean, Harley Quinn's back, Amanda Waller's back. You know, from what I understand, James Gunn was taking a lot of inspiration from the '80s comics specifically, and the '80s comics of Suicide Squad, and he was having some kind of offbeat choices as far as the team composition, like I believe Polka Dot Man is in there. Let me double check on that. I mean,
Man.
Well, the first one made Captain Boomerang work pretty well, I thought. Which actually the logo for the movie is lifted from the original Suicide Squad comics logo.
So
let me see. We got Harley Quinn, Amanda Waller, Rick Flag, Captain Boomerang, Polka Dot Man, Ratcatcher, King Shark, and other undisclosed roles. Undisclosed roles. Excuse me.
I'm fascinated that Idris Elba, Taika Waititi, and Nathan Fillion are in the cast, and Michael Rooker.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
They have not mentioned who each of them are, but
the DC.
And John Cena's in it too. Look at that.
Peacemaker,
The DC.
That's cool that John Cena's in it.
They always intrigue me, but I'm always cautious with them.
Yes.
And that seems to be my approach to most of them, even in this day. Now,
well, I mean, I think that they're finding their footing because they have de-emphasized the shared nature of the DC extended universe, even though they are still in the same universe. You know, they haven't like stressed it quite so much, which I mean, I think that's good because like they shouldn't shy away from it, but they shouldn't be counting on that to save them. You know, like they still have to make movies that work in and of themselves.
Well, I think that separate but in the same universe is the best take that they can do at this point. Maybe small crossovers as time goes on.
Well, that's kind of, I mean, that's how it went in the Arrowverse at first. They would do, you know, Felicity would be on Flash one week, and then a couple weeks later, you know, Flash would show up on Arrow, you know, that sort of thing. And that they built it slowly over time. And then the first crossover they did was kind of a low-key one relative to what they could have done. You know, basically the Supergirl part of it consisted of the last 2 minutes of that episode. You know, that they just really kind of, so they took a low-key approach, which is not what they tried to do with the movies, and we see how that happened.
Dave, you're saying something?
Go for it.
I was saying as far as the DC universe, I'd love to see them try to do something with Green Lantern again, because I know.
Yeah.
They've been kicking that around.
They want to.
See, I didn't hate. I'm like one of the few people who didn't hate the Green Lantern film.
I didn't either.
I didn't either. I don't mind it. It's not great.
I need to watch it again because I remembered when I saw it. Like I was really okay. Full disclosure, I was really looking forward to it when it came out because I was like, okay, finally, this is at the time. And finally, I was like, this is DC's first big, like, non-Batman, non-Superman movie. This will be their chance to branch out a bit. This was pre-DC Extended Universe. And I never saw it in the theater because I heard it was bad. And then I later saw it when a friend and I had watched it. He really liked it. And he was a big comic book guy. He knew that most people didn't like it. I watched it and, like, honestly, I remembered really hating it, not because it was overly like, there wasn't like obviously bad acting or things like that. I think part of it was just at the time, I need to watch it again, but at the time I remembered thinking it just felt so soulless and it felt so like a computer made the movie. And And I remembered really hating the CGI'd costume. Like, I thought it looked really bad. And it just was really forgettable and really like playing it safe. And I mean, I've heard similar critiques about it, that it felt very much like something that would have come out in like 2003 during that very much, we think we can kind of era for superhero films, which again, I got to watch it again. I would probably be a little easier on it. Because like, for example, I didn't really like Ang Lee's Hulk when I first saw it, and then I've watched it a couple times since then, and I've grown to really appreciate it, especially given the version of Hulk that we have now, who he works great in the context of the MCU, but I think Hulk as a character to carry, well, like as a character to carry his own movie, I think that Ang Lee's Hulk, like, it doesn't entirely work, but I think what it was going for, like, it was going for much darker territory than most blockbuster superhero movies go for, because it talks about, child abuse and alcoholism and the sins of the father being revisited upon the son, and all of the and like someone who's kind of inherently at war with himself even before the gamma accident, and then the gamma accident just exacerbates the war that he already has going on, and the fact that he can't overcome his father, who takes on the traits of the absorbing man, even though the absorbing man wasn't his father in the comics, but like he has those characteristics, and so he's literally trying to absorb his son's life and his happiness, his autonomy. And so, I mean, I think thematically it works great. And I think it could have been done better without like the multiple shots in one frame thing. But like,
like
it.
Well, I didn't how dark it was in many of the action scenes. I could not see any of the action.
Another thing,
yeah.
Another thing is, and you kind of touched on this, but like, I went into it as and I'm still a huge fan of Ang Lee. I think his films are incredible, and they do tend to be very thematic. They do tend to have a lot of, but they do tend to be very meditative. They're not made with the average American audience in mind. Even the more action ones like Hulk or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I think is a phenomenal film. But a lot of people went in thinking it would be straight action and were sorely disappointed. And I really loved what Roger Ebert said about Hulk. He said it was a comic book movie for people who wouldn't be caught dead at a comic book movie. And it kind of was.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, he was and that's why, like with Captain Logan of Superhero Rewind fame on Geekvolution, he talked about how he felt like the panels within panels thing, that in a lot of ways that Ang Lee might have been trying to kind of justify the comic book film to people that might not have otherwise. And I think there could be some merit to that, on top of the fact that, like you said, is like, I'm thinking of like something that was super mainstream, but I think it did fine at the box office. It didn't do like amazing business, but it was like Life of Pi. Like for a long time, people struggled to adapt that book because it was so philosophical. And he managed to do it in a way that was visually spectacular, but it also did not sacrifice the meditative philosophical side of things. And I thought it was
spectacular. Yeah.
Well, and I thought it was a pretty darn intelligent film, specifically when talking about like it's kind of a Jungian idea of the religion as a mythos that is passed down inherently, and you saw that carried over with the ending, where he's like, the version of the story that has the tiger in it versus the version of the story where it's just his family just kind of gradually dying off in misery and stuff. And it's like, I thought that was really a good illustration of that point. And, it was but yeah, I mean, I think you can blend philosophy with and meditativeness within something that's more action oriented. Like, I think that Christopher Nolan gets a lot of praise for trying to blend philosophical ideas with action, but I think that his films I wouldn't call them meditative. I would call them cerebral, and
they are very clever films. You do have to think and pay attention. Yeah.
Well, and in the case of something like Inception, I think Inception is something that it's a unique idea, but it's such a complex idea that one of the critical reviews talked about that it invented something called continuous exposition, where it pretty much has to explain the entire thing to you as you're watching it. And I do agree. I remembered enjoying it as a spectacle and as a interesting kind of mind heist film, but I did think that in a lot of ways the exposition was handled rather clumsily. Plus the fact that people were really trying to read into it a lot of really deep themes that I didn't necessarily think were there, but I would have to watch it again because I haven't watched it in a while. But but I would not at all call his films meditative per se. Even something like the Matrix films, which they're kind of in a similar category of philosophical action, but they're not exactly meditative either. I do think Ang Lee films, they do take their time to really flesh out their ideas and to give you that sense of mood, which I'll never forget a scene in Ang Lee's Hulk that I've never seen in any other superhero film that I can think of off the top of my head. It was a scene that even the first time I saw it, even when I didn't really like it all that much because I didn't really understand what he was going for at the time. I was a kid too. But I didn't understand what he was going for at the time, but I get it now. A scene that even back then I remembered feeling extraordinarily sad during a scene. It was a flashback to Bruce's childhood, and it was the younger version of his dad. And they had the two stuffed animals, one of which was green, of course. And they were his first instinct was to make them fight. And it was his first instinct is to go towards aggression. And of course, as we find out, his father's abusive to his mother and to him and to young Bruce. So of course, violence is his first inclination, even in play. But I remember not even really understanding that on a conscious level, but I remembered as a kid, I got overwhelmed with sadness at that moment. And I understand why. It's because I recognized at that age, I even recognized the green parallel, the color green being planted there obviously will be paid off when he actually becomes the Hulk. But still, it was think about it, the seeds of Bruce's rage get planted very early on, but also the fact that he comes from a family where violence is seen as a natural thing in contexts where it really shouldn't be, in a domestic environment or even at play. The first instinct is towards violence. And it's I would actually love to do, I might even do that for my series I want to get started, No Money Film School. I'd love to do some story analysis of Ang Lee's Hulk, and specifically about the kind of psychological underpinnings of who Bruce Banner is, and the fact that it is about the story at its core is about the bad relationships that some children have with their parents and how it manifests in their adult lives, because Betty Ross has a bad relationship with her father, General Thunderbolt Ross, and it gets
understandable in that case.
Well. It does, but it's for both of them, it gets expressed, and it gives them a reason to connect with each other on top of working on this Gamma project, obviously, but they understand what the other person's going through, and again, with the fact that his father, Bruce's father, has the powers of the Absorbing Man, one of the Hulk's biggest adversaries in the comics, it works thematically because a lot of toxic parents will try to leech off of their children's happiness and their life force, essentially, and on an emotional, psychological level, let alone a literal level. And I also like the idea that the Hulk manifesting the way he does, not just on a psychological level because of Bruce's childhood trauma, but also because of something that was passed on. Oh, hello. It was this was kind of something that they invented for the movie, but I really loved it. It was the idea that something in Bruce's father's DNA that got passed down to young Bruce that got activated because of the gamma experiment. That was what made him into the Hulk. I thought, that was a really great idea because it was something that he had no control over that only exacerbated an already terrible situation upon having been exposed to the gamma accident. And, I thought that fit. A lot of people just didn't, I think a lot of people just didn't want, I don't think that people really wanted to give the movie a chance because they were so used to, they couldn't get past, the Hulk is just a big dumb brute. They couldn't see. Yeah, they weren't willing to see below the surface, which, the Incredible Hulk, which it's largely been forgotten about in the MCU chronicles, but like that one was a bit more of like a streamlined, more action packed, more like, fugitive on the run kind of movie. And the Hulk can definitely work as that because that was also very much a part of the comics as well, even from the earliest days. So I mean, it's not out of character at all. It's just a different side of the character. I just appreciated that a movie was there to really delve into the heart of the Hulk's rage, which that didn't even get fully explored until the 80s because of more serious themes being introduced into comics. And for the Hulk specifically, it was, child abuse and the father having been an alcoholic and a wife beater and all this stuff that they couldn't have really talked about in decades past. But it made total sense because that decade was when those kinds of issues were getting more talked about in the mainstream in general. And I think that those issues were better understood as well because obviously that had been around for, ever since there was alcohol readily available to most people. And even you can trace it back even to like, Rebel Without a Cause in the 50s, like there's clearly youth, not knowing what to do with itself because of parental neglect and parental conflict. So the stuff's been around, but it just wasn't being talked about. And it still hasn't really been talked about in the context of mainstream superhero fare outside of Ang Lee's Hulk. So, I mean, that also makes it pretty unique.
So wanted to go ahead and, of course, before we start wrapping up, because we are running over, we started late, so I figure this is fine. But I wanted to shout out to Michael McNally again. Thank you for checking out the show, and it kind of gave us a couple of comments there, but most of it was just wishing us well, and that the text kind of got warped up. But it's always good to wish any viewers well. I hope any of you who are listening have enjoyed our conversation. A lot of in depth. We started on anime and we ended up in the superhero realm, and we covered all over the map, including censorship and everything. So I think we hit quite a few of those. So
one more corner we haven't really hit yet, but I'll just throw out real quick, and I'll keep it quick. But we were just talking a little bit about Life of Pi a few minutes back. And one thing I learned recently that I've been meaning to mention on this channel, and it just hasn't happened. But Irfan Khan, the very talented actor who was the star of that film, did recently pass. And So I want to make sure that we give him a shout out because he was a very, very talented actor and one of the few Bollywood stars that was recognizable to American audiences. So that would be, and then of course, I don't believe I mentioned as well that Fred Willard also recently. So very talented comedic force there. So wanted to give them a quick shout out.
Yeah, he will be missed.
Yes.
Well, with that being said, we'll go ahead and start going out. Dane, did you want to tell us anything about yourself, or tell what audience we do have?
Well, I'm Dane Kyle, aka Dane Damarung on YouTube, and I am on the channel Indie Horror Film Creative, and I do a show called Blu-ray Views, where I unbox Blu-rays that come in the mail, and I sometimes talk about them in some kind of thematic way, like I did a disturbing non-horror films list, like films that were as disturbing as a lot of horror films, but they weren't classified in the horror genre. So I do things like that. I'm gonna be getting No Money Film School going, where I'll be wanting to do a lot of like in-depth story analyses of films, and also just perhaps talking to some people I know as far as being able to help people get started with filmmaking and to kind of eliminate the financial bar for entry to get started.
Oh, very good. I look forward to that series when it comes, definitely. So Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself there.
Well, I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. If you have not checked that channel out, go ahead and check it out. But I also moonlight at another page called Delusions of Grandeur. I just recently got out a review on the third series that I have completed anime-wise, so I'm kind of proud of myself. But definitely check that review out. I also do video pickup review videos, and on Inside Movies Galore, we podcast about movies from every Tuesday. And tomorrow we are going to be checking out some of the Meet the Cast moments with Dane into his dementia mind. So where we'll be discussing The Elephant Man and Charlie Chaplin's City Lights.
City Lights and The Elephant Man. Which I rewatched City Lights tonight just for having it fresh in my mind, and I'll be doing that with the 4K of The Elephant Man that I got, which not to give too much away, but the ending of City Lights is like if you don't have a tear in your eye when that ending comes, and it's like you're dead inside. And I'm saying that as someone who never cries at movies ever.
I feel like I watched some bonus features for Elephant Man, and I feel like John Hurt said something similar about that movie. I'm like, okay, yeah.
About City Lights or about
Elephant Man? Yeah.
Oh yeah, well that was like the first. Honestly, that was the first movie that I can remember. Like I used to kind of hold it up as a point of pride in a way. Like I saw it when I was 20, and like I saw it in college, and for a long time, like I had never actually shed a tear at a film. Like I had gotten a little teary eyed with some, like very, very few, but no actual tears had fallen. But like with The Elephant Man, like I broke that record, just broke, because I was like the part that got me was the the picture of the actress played by Anne Bancroft, and he says, "I shall put it here in a place of honor next to my mother," and his mother, of course, is a beautiful woman, and I don't know why, but that got me, and I think it just hurt. I just could feel the pain right there. But I'll get more into that tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we have Kotobuki Jake, who is my co-host, right. And also when his channel gets back on board, you better let us know. We look forward to that. I had one snake on our yard. You could have used that as footage.
I love that picture that you had. Yes. You should have let me know. You should have. I think I was at work at the time. I would have dropped it
gone within a flash. As soon as I turned around, it was gone.
Yeah, actually, I saw one. I think I saw one the next day that was just booking it. Like there was just no catching that one.
But I don't have to tell us much about this channel. If you're watching this, you probably know about our channel at SeptumSin versus the World. Mm-hmm. I do plan on making one change to the Volgcast. At the end of each month, on the last Monday, I plan on trying to do a anime series discussion, which gives people a month to do it. Now, not everybody can necessarily get on board, but there are ways of seeing it. The first one is one, and I also thought about this so that Dave can have a definite reason to go through it, which is When They Cry, or Higurashi, right, with the first 2 seasons. And if anybody wants to watch the OVA, they can. Of course, it's also on H-Dive.
If you really wanted to go all out, you could track down Umineko and see if you can stream the other seasons. But there was a new series about to come out, and it got delayed because of all the COVID stuff.
So I figured that would be a good thing to start out. And then at the end of July, I also want to put out Cowboy Bebop, because it's one I think would be kind of cool. It'd be an excuse. Again, Dave just got recently his copy of Cowboy Bebop, and I'll be updating mine in the middle of July, so that'll be really cool to see at the end. Nice. And then we'll go from there and see how well that is. So it's something to look forward to at the end of each month. This one will be on the 29th, and I don't even know what the last Monday of July is. So just things to strive for in the future. But with that being said, I wish you all a fine good night.
All right.
Good night.